The sterile, recycled air of an airport terminal holds a million silent stories of reunion and departure. But on a crisp autumn morning at Chicago O'Hare, within the bustling chaos of Gate C-17, a story was about to unfold that would send shock waves through the corporate stratosphere of one of the world's largest airlines. It wasn't a story of a hijacking or a medical emergency. It was a story about a line, a simple velvet rope separating the privileged from the patient. A black woman in a simple grey sweatsuit stepped toward that rope, holding a first-class ticket, and was met with a wall of derision. The gate agent saw her clothes, her skin, and made a judgment. They didn't see the steel in her eyes, nor could they possibly comprehend that the woman they were about to publicly humiliate held the power to dismantle their careers, their station, and the very operational integrity of the airline itself. They thought they were enforcing a rule. They were actually starting a war. The fluorescent lights of Terminal 1 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport hummed with a monotonous, soul-draining energy. It was a symphony of orchestrated chaos, the distant rumble of jet engines, the incessant beeping of baggage carts, the cacophony of a dozen different languages blending into a single anxious murmur. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, it was all data. She sat on one of the cold, unforgiving metal benches, her worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius resting on her knee. Dressed in a simple, high-quality charcoal grey sweatsuit and minimalist white sneakers, she looked less like a corporate titan and more like a weary traveller trying to blend into the background. Which was, of course, the entire point. Her gaze, sharp and analytical behind unassuming clear-framed glasses, swept the area. She wasn't just waiting for her flight Aerovista AV788 to London Heathrow, she was working. She observed the way the ground crew moved with a hurried inefficiency, the overflowing trash can near the Hudson News, the stressed, almost frantic energy emanating from the customer service desk. Every detail was a data point, a small thread in the vast, complex tapestry of the airline's ground operations. For the past 6 months, Evelyn, as the newly appointed head of operational integrity and surprise audits for Aerovista Airlines, had been the ghost in their machine, the anonymous passenger whose reports could make or break a station manager's career. Her focus eventually settled on Gate C-17. The London flight was a flagship route, a major revenue generator. The gate should have been a paragon of efficiency and customer service. Instead, it was a pressure cooker. The lead gate agent, a woman whose name tag read Brenda Potrehor, patrolled the area with the self-important air of a feudal lord surveying her meagre fiefdom. She had a severe blonde bob that looked like it could cut glass, and a mouth permanently set in a thin line of disapproval. Her voice, when she used the intercom, was a sharp, nasal bark that sliced through the terminal's hum. Evelyn watched Brenda interact with passengers. An elderly man who asked a simple question about seat assignments was treated with condescending impatience. A young family struggling with a stroller and 2 crying toddlers was offered no assistance, only a withering glare. Brenda seemed to derive a palpable sense of power from her position, a small pedestal from which she could pass judgment on the river of humanity flowing past her. Her primary accomplice was a younger agent, a man named Kyle, who seemed to take all his cues from her, mirroring her sighs and eye rolls with practiced synchronicity. Seated near the priority boarding lane were a couple who embodied a particular brand of modern entitlement. They were in their late 40s, tanned and toned, dripping in designer logos that screamed new money. The man, Chad Hayworth, was loudly complaining into his phone about a totally incompetent subordinate, while his wife, Tiffany, scrolled through her phone with a look of profound boredom, occasionally sighing dramatically. They were Platinum Elite members, a fact Chad had made sure to announce to the general vicinity when he'd first arrived. They positioned themselves as the unofficial guardians of the priority lane, occasionally glancing at the growing line of economy passengers with undisguised disdain. Evelyn had a first-class ticket nestled inside her simple canvas tote bag. It was standard procedure for her audits. To truly understand the passenger experience, she had to live it across all service tiers. Today was a first-class audit. She wasn't looking for trouble, but her job was to find it, to identify the friction points, the failures in process, and personnel that cost the airline millions in lost revenue and goodwill. She had a feeling Gate C-17 was about to provide a wealth of data. We will now begin pre-boarding for Aerovista flight BT-8 to London Heathrow. Brenda's voice crackled over the PA system. This is for our passengers requiring special assistance families with small children and active duty military personnel in uniform. A small trickle of people moved forward. Evelyn remained seated, observing. Brenda's scrutiny of each passenger was intense, her gaze lingering on a family whose children were, in her opinion, perhaps a little too old to qualify. Next, Brenda announced, her voice hardening slightly. We will begin boarding our concierge key and global services members. Please have your boarding passes ready. A handful of seasoned travelers approached. Then came the announcement Evelyn was waiting for. We will now welcome our first-class passengers, as well as our Platinum Elite and Gold Star Alliance members, to board through the priority lane. The Hayworths stood up with a sense of ceremony, Chad giving a smug little smile to the economy passengers as he adjusted his blazer. Evelyn tucked her book into her bag, stood up, and stretched casually. She pulled out her boarding pass from her tote bag and walked calmly towards the blue carpet of the priority lane. She saw the flicker in Brenda's eyes before she even reached the podium. It was a look of immediate, instinctual dismissal. Brenda's gaze raked over Evelyn's simple sweatsuit, her unadorned face, her practical sneakers. The gate agent's brain, programmed by 1,000 unconscious biases, ran a quick, flawed calculation and arrived at a single erroneous conclusion. This person does not belong here. Evelyn was 3 feet from the podium when Brenda held up a hand palm out, like a traffic cop halting a jalopy. "Excuse me," Brenda said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "The economy boarding hasn't started yet. You'll need to wait for your group to be called." Evelyn paused, maintaining a neutral expression. "I believe my group was just called," she said, her voice calm and even. "First class?" Brenda's smile was thin and sharp. "The priority lane is for our first class and elite status members. The general boarding line is over there." She gestured vaguely with her thumb towards the long, snaking queue of other passengers. Behind her, Chad Hayworth let out an audible scoff. "Some people just don't listen," he said to his wife, loud enough for everyone to hear. Tiffany giggled a sound like tiny, sharp icicles. Evelyn felt a familiar, weary tightening in her chest. It was the feeling she'd encountered countless times in her life, in boardrooms, at academic conferences, and now apparently at an airport gate. It was the feeling of being instantly underestimated, of having to prove she belonged in a space she had more than earned the right to occupy. She held out her boarding pass. "I'm in seat 2A. I am in the correct line." Brenda didn't even glance at the pass. Her eyes remained locked on Evelyn's face, a glint of challenge in them. This was no longer about procedure. It had become a power play. Brenda had an audience, and she was not about to be contradicted by someone she had already mentally categorized and dismissed. The storm had arrived at Gate C-17. The space around the boarding podium at Gate C-17 seemed to shrink, the ambient noise of the terminal fading into a dull roar as the confrontation crystallized. All eyes were now on the two women, Brenda the gate agent, standing behind her bastion of authority, and Evelyn the passenger, standing on the threshold of the priority lane, an island of calm in a rising tide of tension. "Ma'am," Brenda said, enunciating each syllable with exaggerated slowness, as if speaking to a child or someone who didn't understand English. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. You are holding up the line for our actual priority passengers." The emphasis on the word actual was a deliberate sharpened barb. It was meant to embarrass, to put Evelyn in her place. Kyle, the junior agent, shuffled some papers, avoiding eye contact, but listening intently. The Hayworths watched with rapt attention, their expressions a mixture of amusement and indignation on Brenda's behalf. "There is no need to be condescending," Evelyn replied, her voice remaining level, though a sliver of ice had entered her tone. "All you need to do is look at my boarding pass. It will confirm my seat is 2A first class." She extended her hand again, holding the pass steady. The crisp paper was a stark contrast to the escalating emotion of the scene. Brenda crossed her arms, a classic defensive posture. She was doubling down. Backing down now would be an admission of error, a crack in her fragile authority. "I don't need to see your pass," she snapped. "We've had a lot of issues recently with people trying to board early using fake or old boarding passes. It's a security issue." It was a blatant fabricated excuse, and they both knew it. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and transparent. She was accusing Evelyn of being a fraud, a queue jumper, someone trying to game the system. "Are you accusing me of attempting to board with a fraudulent document?" Evelyn asked her question, precise and dangerous. She was no longer just a passenger. She was an auditor, collecting evidence. She catalogued Brenda's exact words, her body language, the reactions of those around them. The directness of the question seemed to momentarily fluster Brenda. "I'm just saying you need to wait for your group. Now please, step aside." Chad Hayworth, emboldened, stepped forward. "You heard her," he said, puffing out his chest. "Some of us paid a lot of money to not have to wait with the general public. It's about maintaining standards." "Thank you, Mr. Hayworth," Brenda said, flashing him a grateful smile. "It's nice to know some of our passengers appreciate our procedures." The alliance was forged. It was now them, the gatekeeper, and the entitled elite against the outsider. The other passengers in the economy line were watching, some with sympathy for Evelyn, others with annoyance at the delay, but most were silent, unwilling to get involved. Evelyn slowly retracted her hand, the boarding pass still clutched in her fingers. She knew this had reached a critical juncture. She could create a scene, raise her voice, and demand to see a manager. That would be the emotional response. But her training, her entire professional ethos, was built on methodical, evidence-based de-escalation and assessment. She had to see the protocol through to its inevitable disastrous conclusion. "I am not going to step aside," Evelyn stated, her voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable weight of finality. "I am a ticketed first-class passenger, and I am in the correct boarding line. I am asking you as an employee of Aerovista Airlines to scan my boarding pass. If you refuse to do your job, I will require you to call your station manager to this gate immediately." The word refuse was a trigger. It shifted the narrative from a passenger misunderstanding to an employee's dereliction of duty. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. She had been challenged directly, her authority questioned in front of a crowd. "Fine," she spat, her voice rising in pitch. "You want the manager, you'll get the manager." She snatched the intercom microphone. "Javier, we have a situation at C-17. A passenger is refusing to follow instructions and is disrupting the boarding process." Her choice of words was deliberate, painting Evelyn as the aggressor. In her report, Evelyn noted, employee misrepresented the situation, to management preemptively framing the passenger as non-compliant. A few minutes later, a man in a slightly too tight suit bustled towards the gate. He had slicked back hair and a practiced, insincere smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His name tag identified him as Javier Morales, ORD station manager. He arrived and surveyed the scene, his eyes flicking from Brenda's indignant face to Evelyn's calm demeanor, and finally to the impatient Hayworth's. His immediate goal was not to find the truth, but to disperse the crowd and get the flight out on time. On-time departure was the god he worshipped. What seems to be the problem here? Javier asked, directing the question to Brenda, but looking at Evelyn. This passenger, Brenda began pointing an accusatory finger, is trying to board with the priority group, but refuses to show me a valid boarding pass. She is becoming disruptive and holding up my flight. That is an inaccurate statement, Evelyn said calmly, turning her attention to Javier. I have repeatedly offered my boarding pass to your agent. She has refused to look at it and has accused me of trying to board with a fraudulent document. She then told me to leave the priority line. I am in seat 2A. Here is my pass. She offered it to Javier. He took it, but his glance at it was cursory dismissive. His priority was backing his employee, maintaining a united front. To do otherwise would be to invite chaos every time a passenger had a complaint. I understand, Javier said, handing the pass back to Evelyn without scanning it. But sometimes there are system glitches, and the scanners won't accept a pass until the correct group is called. Brenda is one of our most experienced agents. She knows the procedure. If she's asking you to wait, it's for a reason. He was creating a corporate fiction to shield his employee, to invalidate Evelyn's reality. So to be clear, Evelyn said, her eyes boring into his, you are the station manager for Aerovista at O'Hare. I am, he said, with a hint of pride. And you are officially endorsing your agent's decision to deny me, a ticketed first-class passenger, boarding at my designated time, based on her unsubstantiated assessment that I do not belong in this line. The legalistic precision of her language gave Javier a moment's pause. This was not the typical irate customer. I am asking for your cooperation to ensure an on-time departure for everyone, he said, sidestepping the question. Now, if you'll please just step over here, we can sort this out after the priority passengers have boarded. He was trying to manage her, to placate her, while ultimately siding with his staff. He had made his final critical error. He had drawn the line not just on the carpet, but between the airline's stated policies and its actual practices. Evelyn took a slow, deliberate breath. The time for observation was over. The time for action had come. She looked from Brenda's smug face to Javier's dismissive one. She saw the Hayworths smirking behind them. She had given them every opportunity to do the right thing, to simply follow their own rules. They had refused. I see, she said softly. You've chosen to make this the official position of Aerovista's ground operations at this station. I'm afraid you've both just made a catastrophic miscalculation. The air at gate C-17 grew thick with a sudden, palpable silence. Evelyn's final words, delivered without anger, but with a chilling certainty, hung in the space between them. Javier's practiced smile faltered. Brenda's smug expression curdled into one of confusion. A catastrophic miscalculation. Who did this woman think she was? Ma'am, I don't appreciate being threatened, Javier said, attempting to regain control. His voice was sterner now, the veneer of the helpful manager stripped away to reveal the bureaucrat beneath. My agent was following protocol. Now you can either step aside or we can call airport security. It's your choice. This was it. The final escalation. The point of no return. Evelyn didn't answer him immediately. Instead, she reached into her simple canvas tote bag. The Hayworths exchanged a nervous glance. Brenda shifted her weight, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes for the first time. Javier stood his ground, but his posture was rigid. Evelyn's hand emerged not with a weapon or a phone to record them, but with a sleek, dark, blue leather ID wallet. It was unadorned professional and looked profoundly out of place with her casual attire. She flipped it open with a quiet snap. Inside on one side was a standard-looking employee ID card with her picture. On the other, laminated and embossed with the official Aerovista corporate seal, was a card with bold, unequivocal lettering. Dr. Evelyn Reed, SVP Head of Operational Integrity and Surprise Audits, Aerovista Airlines, Corporate Oversight Division. She didn't shove it in their faces. She simply held it up steady and centered about a foot from Javier's chest. Javier's eyes scanned the ID. He squinted, leaned in slightly, and then his face went completely slack. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, greyish pallor. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Brenda, seeing the look on her manager's face, craned her neck to see. Her eyes found the words, operational integrity and surprise audits. The meaning crashed down on her like a physical blow. Her face, which had been a mask of indignant authority, crumbled into sheer, unadulterated panic. Her hands, which had been crossed defiantly, flew to her mouth. A small, strangled gasp escaped. "Mr. Morales," Evelyn said, her voice now transformed. The quiet passenger was gone. In her place was a senior vice president, and her voice was a precision instrument of corporate power. It was cold, clear, and cut through the terminal noise like a scalpel. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed. I am the head of the division that writes the protocols you and your staff so spectacularly fail to follow. This flight, this gate, and this entire station have been the subject of a surprise audit, which I have been conducting personally since I arrived at this airport 3 hours ago." She let the words sink in. The Hayworths, who had been whispering to each other, fell silent, their faces frozen in disbelief. Chad's smug grin had vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror as he began to connect the dots of his own boorish behavior. Evelyn turned her gaze to Brenda, whose eyes were wide with terror. "Brenda," Evelyn said, her tone devoid of any warmth, "your conduct has been noted. Your refusal to scan a valid boarding pass, your fabricated accusation of fraud, your public humiliation of a passenger based on what shall we call it, a visual assessment, your decision to escalate rather than de-escalate, your misrepresentation of the situation to your manager." She ticked off each point like a prosecutor listing charges. "You are a profound liability to this airline." Brenda began to stammer. I didn't. I thought." "You thought wrong," Evelyn said, cutting her off cleanly. She then turned her steely gaze back to Javier. "And you, Mr. Morales, you had the opportunity to rectify the situation. You are in a leadership position. You had the power to manage your employee to enforce our airline's stated values of customer service and respect. Instead, you chose to endorse her behavior. You dismissed a valid customer complaint without investigation. You prioritized a dysfunctional status quo over procedure. You threatened a first-class passenger with security for simply asking your staff to do their job." She paused, letting the weight of his failure settle on him. "I want you to get on your radio right now, and I want you to request the immediate presence of Aerovista's Chief of Airport Security for the Midwest region. I also want you to contact corporate HR and inform them that you and Agent Brenda Miller are to be placed on immediate indefinite administrative leave pending a full investigation. An investigation, she added, her eyes narrowing slightly, that I will be personally overseeing. Javier was paralyzed, his mind racing, trying to find an escape route where none existed. He was looking at the woman who held his entire career in the palm of her hand. The on-time departure he prized so highly was now the least of his concerns. His entire world was collapsing around him. "Do it now, Mr. Morales," Evelyn commanded. Her voice didn't need to be raised. It was laced with an authority that was absolute. With trembling hands, Javier fumbled for his radio. His fingers seemed clumsy alien to him. "Dispatch, this is Javier Morales at C-17, he stammered, his voice cracking. I need to request." The spell was broken. The other passengers, who had been watching in stunned silence, began murmuring. The story was already spreading down the line. The woman in the sweatsuit wasn't just a passenger, she was the boss. The big boss. And the gate agents who had bullied her were now facing a reckoning of epic proportions. The power dynamic at Gate C-17 had not just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. As Javier stammered into his radio, the scene at Gate C-17 transformed from a tense standoff into the frantic aftermath of a detonated bomb. The carefully constructed reality of the gate agents had been shattered, and they were now scrambling amidst the debris of their careers. Kyle, the junior agent, who had been a silent accomplice, looked as if he'd seen a ghost. He began busying himself with the computer, pretending to be engrossed in the flight manifest, desperately trying to become invisible. Brenda was visibly shaking, tears welling in her eyes. The mask of authority had been replaced by one of raw fear. "Dr. Reed," she pleaded, her voice a pathetic whisper, "I am so sorry. It was a mistake. I was just stressed the flight is full." Evelyn held up a hand, silencing her. "Save your excuses for your HR hearing. Brenda," she said, her tone clinical and detached. "Right now your priority is to step away from this podium. You will not interact with another passenger. Is that understood?" Brenda nodded meekly, her face ashen, and stumbled back towards the staff door, looking utterly broken. Javier, having completed his humiliating call, turned back to Evelyn, his face a mess of desperation. "Dr. Reed, please," he begged. "A moment of your time. This is a misunderstanding. Brenda has been under a lot of pressure. We can fix this. A commendation, an upgrade on your next flight, whatever you want." "What I want, Mr. Morales," Evelyn cut in, her voice dangerously low, "is for my airline to function as it's supposed to. What I want is for a black woman in a sweatsuit, holding a valid first-class ticket, to be treated with the same respect as a white man in a suit. This isn't about me wanting a personal apology or a free upgrade. This is about a systemic failure of which you and your agent are the public face. You have failed." Just then, two figures approached with haste. One was a man in a crisp pilot's uniform, his face etched with concern. The other was the lead flight attendant, her expression a mixture of apprehension and professionalism. They had clearly been alerted, via the cockpit communication system, that a major incident involving a corporate SVP was unfolding at their gate. "Dr. Reed." The pilot, Captain Miller, asked, his voice calm and respectful. "I'm Captain David Miller. I was just informed of the situation. On behalf of the entire flight crew, I want to offer my sincerest apologies for what you've experienced. It is unacceptable." Evelyn offered him a slight nod. "Thank you, Captain. This is not a reflection on your crew. This is a ground operations issue." "Is there anything at all we can do?" the lead flight attendant, a woman named Sarah, asked earnestly. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "You can begin boarding the rest of the passengers. Let's try to minimize the delay this incident has caused them. I will board last." As Sarah and the now terrified Kyle began scanning tickets for the other first-class passengers, Evelyn turned her attention to the Hayworths. Chad and Tiffany had been trying to discreetly merge with the boarding crowd, hoping to escape notice. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayworth, a moment," Evelyn called out. They froze, turning around with forced, sickly smiles. "Yes?" Chad asked, his voice strained. "I couldn't help but overhear your comments earlier," Evelyn said, her gaze unwavering. "Your vocal support for the agent's discriminatory actions, and your rather classist remarks about maintaining standards. Your Platinum Elite status comes with a code of conduct, a mutual agreement of respect for fellow passengers and airline staff. You have violated that code." Chad's face paled. "Now, hold on, I'm not interested in your explanation," Evelyn interrupted. "I am, however, very interested in the corporate account through which your status is issued. I believe it's with the financial firm Sterling Thorne Aerovista has a multi-million-dollar corporate travel partnership with them. I'm sure their ethics department will be fascinated to hear that one of their senior partners publicly endorsed discriminatory behavior while traveling on company business. I will be lodging a formal complaint with both Aerovista's corporate liaison and directly with Sterling Thorne's head of human resources." Tiffany gasped, placing a hand over her mouth. Chad looked like he was going to be physically ill. In a few sentences, Evelyn had targeted the very source of their privilege and entitlement. Their coveted status, their corporate standing, it was all suddenly at risk. And of course, Evelyn added, as a final blow, "Your tickets for this flight are being cancelled. You will not be flying to London today. Our security team, who are on their way, will escort you from the gate. You can rebook your travel through the main customer service line." With that, she dismissed them. She turned her back on their stunned, horrified faces and addressed Captain Miller. "Captain, I will need a full copy of the gate's CCTV footage from the last hour, as well as the employee records for Agent Miller and Manager Morales. Please have them sent to my corporate office by the time we land in London." "It will be done, Dr. Reed," the captain affirmed without hesitation. Two uniformed airport security officers arrived looking serious and professional. Evelyn gave them a brief, concise summary and pointed out Javier Brenda, who was hovering by the staff door, and the Hayworths. The transfer of authority was seamless. The security officers began speaking to the disgraced employees and the entitled couple in low, firm tones. Evelyn finally allowed herself to board the aircraft. As she stepped through the door, the lead flight attendant, Sarah, greeted her. "Dr. Reed, welcome aboard. Please let me know if there is anything at all you need." "Thank you, Sarah," Evelyn said warmly. "Just a bottle of water before takeoff would be lovely." She made her way to seat 2A. As she settled into the plush leather, she looked out the window. She could see Javier and Brenda being escorted away from the gate area. She saw the Hayworths, their luggage, now being offloaded from the plane, arguing futilely with a security officer. It was a satisfying sight, but Evelyn felt no joy, only a grim sense of purpose. The public part of the audit was over. The real work, the deep systemic dissection of how a place like O'Hare could become so toxic, was just beginning. She pulled out a small, secure tablet from her tote bag, opened a new file, labeled ORD-C and Citizen Audit, and began to type. Her report would not be about a single unpleasant encounter. It would be a blueprint for change, forged in the fire of public humiliation and corporate failure. The transatlantic flight to London was 8 hours of focused, relentless work. While other first-class passengers enjoyed champagne and gourmet meals, Evelyn Reed sat in the quiet hum of the Boeing 787's cabin, her face illuminated by the glow of her encrypted tablet. The incident at Gate C-17 was no longer just a personal affront. It was the tip of a colossal iceberg, and Evelyn was determined to map every treacherous inch of it beneath the surface. Upon landing at Heathrow and checking into her hotel, she didn't rest. She convened a secure video conference with her core team back in New York, a hand-picked group of data analysts, former NTSB investigators and HR specialists known for their ruthless efficiency. "All right, team," she began, her face crisp and clear on their screens. "Let's unpack O'Hare. I want everything. Pull every customer complaint filed against the ORD station for the past 24 months. Cross-reference them by employee name, particularly Brenda Miller and Javier Morales. I want to see if a pattern emerges. Filter for keywords: rude, discriminatory, refused, profiled." The data began pouring in within the hour, and the picture it painted was damning. Under Javier Morales' tenure as station manager, complaints of rude and dismissive behavior had risen by 300%. A disturbing number of those complaints came from non-white passengers. Time and again, they described situations eerily similar to Evelyn's own being passed over, in priority lines being spoken to, condescendingly, having their credentials questioned. And for every complaint, the resolution was the same: a templated apology from Javier's office, a few thousand bonus miles, and a note in the file stating, "Passenger misunderstanding, employee counseled." There was never any real disciplinary action. Javier had created a culture where his staff felt untouchable as long as they kept the planes moving on time. He was gaming the system, Evelyn explained to her team. His performance bonuses were tied almost exclusively to on-time departure metrics, so he incentivized speed over service. If that meant cutting corners, ignoring passenger issues, or allowing his staff to bully people to get them on the plane faster, he was fine with it. He wasn't managing a team, he was managing a number. But the audit went deeper. Evelyn had her investigators pull maintenance and baggage handling logs. They discovered that to keep the departure times sharp, Javier's teams were frequently signing off on final cabin sweeps that were never performed. They found instances where baggage loading was rushed, leading to a spike in lost or damaged luggage claims that was significantly higher than at other hubs like JFK or LAX. He was sacrificing safety and service on the altar of speed. The case of Brenda Miller was even more revealing. Her file was thick with minor commendations for efficiency, all signed by Javier. But it was also peppered with a dozen passenger complaints, all of which had been dismissed. One from 8 months prior was from a black doctor who claimed Brenda had loudly and mockingly questioned if his medical degree was real when he tried to board early with the medical personnel group. Another was from a Latino family who said Brenda had threatened to have them removed from the flight because their children were too noisy at the gate. Brenda wasn't just a stressed employee. She was a serial abuser of her minor authority, protected and enabled by her manager. Javier hadn't just overlooked her behavior, he had cultivated it. Meanwhile, Evelyn's corporate liaison team had acted on her instructions regarding the Hayworths. A senior executive from Aerovista's corporate sales division made a formal call to the CEO of Sterling Thorne. He didn't just report Chad Hayworth's behavior, he presented it as a serious breach of their corporate partnership agreement, which contained a standard good conduct clause for its traveling employees. The fallout was swift. Chad Hayworth was summoned to a meeting with his company's board. Publicly endorsing discriminatory behavior was a massive liability for a financial firm that preached diversity and inclusion in its marketing materials. His coveted partnership was suddenly on thin ice. Their Platinum Elite status was immediately revoked by Aerovista, and a note was placed on their file, flagging them for scrutiny every time they flew. The public line, the one they so disdained, was now their only option. For 3 days, Evelyn and her team worked around the clock from London building their case. They compiled security footage, passenger testimonies, employee records and performance metrics into a single devastating narrative. The report was no longer just about Brenda and Javier. It was about the rot in the entire O'Hare station. It was a story of systemic bias, managerial negligence, and a corporate culture that prioritized statistics over people. The report, which she titled The O'Hare Paradox, a systemic failure in operational integrity, was more than an audit. It was an indictment. It detailed how Javier Morales had created a toxic fiefdom that not only failed customers, but also put the airline at significant legal and financial risk. Every dismissed complaint, every rushed safety check was a potential lawsuit, a potential disaster waiting to happen. On the 4th day, Evelyn flew back to New York. She wasn't flying as an anonymous passenger this time. She was met on the jet bridge at JFK by the airport's own station manager, a man who greeted her with a nervous but profoundly respectful, "Welcome home, Dr. Reed. We have a car waiting for you." She carried her report, now bound in a simple blue cover in her briefcase. It felt heavy, not with the weight of paper, but with the weight of the careers it would end and the change it would force. The time for quiet investigation was over. The hammer was about to fall. The main boardroom on the 50th floor of the Aerovista corporate headquarters in Manhattan was a place of immense power. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a glittering testament to the airline's global reach. It was here that billion-dollar deals were signed and the company's future was charted, and it was here that Evelyn Reed would present her findings. Seated around the massive mahogany table were the most powerful people in the company: Robert Chen, the sharp, pragmatic CEO. The entire executive committee, including the heads of legal, HR, and North American operations, and 2 senior members of the board of directors who happened to be in town. The mood was somber. They had all received a 1-page executive summary of the O'Hare incident, and they knew this was not going to be a pleasant meeting. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, a large monitor behind her. She was no longer the anonymous traveler in a sweatsuit. She wore a tailored navy blue dress, her hair was pulled back in a professional chignon, and her demeanor was one of unshakable command. She was in her element. "Good morning," she began, her voice, calm and steady, filling the room. "We're here to discuss a significant operational and cultural failure at our Chicago O'Hare hub. What began as a standard surprise audit at Gate C-17 uncovered a systemic rot that poses a material threat to the reputation and financial stability of Aerovista Airlines." She didn't start with the video of her own confrontation. That would come later. She started with the data. Charts and graphs filled the screen behind her, illustrating the dramatic spike in passenger complaints under Javier Morales. She highlighted the racial disparities in those complaints, showing with cold, hard numbers that passengers of color were 3 times more likely to report negative interactions with ground staff at O'Hare than at any other Aerovista hub. "This is not a case of a few bad apples," Evelyn stated, her eyes sweeping across the faces at the table. "This is a case of a poisoned orchard. Manager Javier Morales fostered an environment where discriminatory behavior was tolerated and even rewarded in the name of on-time departures. He consistently dismissed and buried legitimate complaints to protect his own performance metrics." She played audio from a past complaint, a recorded call from the doctor whose credentials Brenda had mocked. The man's voice was filled with a mixture of anger and humiliation. The room was silent as they listened. "That complaint was classified by Mr. Morales as unsubstantiated," Evelyn said quietly. No action was taken. She then moved on to the safety lapses, detailing the falsified cabin sweep logs and the rushed baggage procedures. The head of North American operations, a burly man named Frank, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This was happening on his watch. Finally, she played the CCTV footage from Gate C-17. The executives watched in stony silence as the events unfolded on screen. They saw Brenda's dismissive wave of the hand. They heard Chad Hayworth's smug comments. They saw Javier Morales arrive and, without any real investigation, side with his employee against a customer. They watched the entire ugly spectacle of prejudice and incompetence. When the footage showed Evelyn revealing her corporate ID, the tension in the room broke. The CEO, Robert Chen, let out a long, slow breath and rubbed his temples. "This is indefensible," he said, his voice tight with fury. "Absolutely indefensible." "I agree," Evelyn said, "and it requires a decisive and comprehensive response. This cannot be solved with a memo and a new sensitivity training module." She then laid out her recommendations. They were not suggestions. They were demands. 1. The immediate termination of Station Manager Javier Morales for gross negligence, dereliction of duty, and fostering a discriminatory work environment. His severance will be forfeited, and a note will be placed in his permanent record that will follow him throughout the aviation industry. 2. The immediate termination of Gate Agent Brenda Miller for repeated violations of the company's code of conduct and customer service policies. 3. The junior agent Kyle will be placed on 6 months probation and reassigned to baggage handling. He will also be required to complete an intensive one-on-one coaching program on ethical conduct and bystander intervention. He stood by and did nothing. In this company that is no longer acceptable. Therefore, the entire O'Hare ground staff, from the skycaps to the gate agents, will be retrained from the ground up. This will be part of a new system-wide initiative. I've already drafted the proposal. We're calling it the Reed Initiative, a Mandate for Service and Equity. It will involve rigorous scenario-based training on de-escalation and implicit bias. Every employee's certification will be tied to its successful completion. And 5, she said, her eyes meeting the CEO's, we issue a public statement. We don't hide from this. We own it. We acknowledge the failure at O'Hare. We outline the steps we're taking to fix it. And we reaffirm our commitment to treating every single passenger with dignity. It will cause a short-term hit to our stock, but it will be a long-term investment in our brand's integrity. For a moment, the room was silent. Evelyn's plan was aggressive, expensive, and radical. Frank, the head of operations, started to speak. Evelyn, a full retraining of O'Hare will be a logistical nightmare. It could cause delays for weeks. More delays than a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit for discriminatory practices, Evelyn countered instantly. More of a hit to our stock than a viral video of one of our agents berating a passenger. We are one incident away from a PR catastrophe that could cost us 100 times more than this training initiative. The choice is yours, Frank. Robert Chen slammed his hand flat on the table, making everyone jump. "She's right," he declared. "She is absolutely right. We were complacent. This report is a wake-up call and we will answer it. Evelyn, your recommendations are not recommendations. They are now company policy. All of them. Effective immediately." He looked around the table, his gaze daring anyone to challenge him. No one did. "Get HR on the line," Chen commanded his assistant. "I want to personally deliver the news to Mr. Morales and Ms. Miller. And get our PR team in here. We're drafting a statement. The one Dr. Reed outlined." The hammer had fallen. It had come down with the full force of the corporation, swift and unsparing. The gears of change at Aerovista Airlines were beginning to turn, grinding up the old toxic culture to make way for something new. It was a painful, expensive process, But as Evelyn Reed watched the most powerful men and women in her company scramble to implement her plan, she knew it was the only way forward. 6 months after the boardroom confrontation, the ripple effects of the O'Hare incident were still reshaping Aerovista Airlines. The initial fallout had been exactly as Evelyn predicted. When the company issued its public apology and announced the firing of 2 employees and a top-to-bottom retraining of its O'Hare staff, the stock took a 5% dip. News outlets ran stories about the Aerovista meltdown, and competitors tried to poach their corporate clients. But then something remarkable happened. The company's transparency was met not with sustained scorn, but with a grudging respect. Passenger advocacy groups praised the airline for its proactive and honest approach. The story of what happened to Dr. Reed, which inevitably leaked in broad strokes, became a cautionary tale within the industry, a powerful example of hard karma. The Reed Initiative was rolled out system-wide. It was an intensive 2-day training course that was nothing like the boring check-the-box sensitivity videos of the past. It used virtual reality simulations to put employees in the shoes of a passenger experiencing discrimination. It featured blunt, honest conversations about implicit bias. It was difficult, uncomfortable, and transformative. Graduation from the program became a requirement for promotion. At Chicago O'Hare, the change was palpable. The station was now run by a new manager, a woman promoted from within who was known for her exceptional people skills. The atmosphere at the gates felt different, less frantic, more helpful. Passenger satisfaction scores for the hub, which had been in the basement, began a slow but steady climb. Javier Morales and Brenda Miller became ghosts in the industry. Javier tried to get a management position at a smaller regional airline, but the note in his file, combined with industry gossip, made him untouchable. The last anyone heard, he was managing a logistics warehouse for an online retail company. Brenda Miller left Chicago entirely unable to find another job in the travel sector. She had learned the hard way that a few moments of petty tyranny could have a lifetime of consequences. As for the Hayworths, their karma was swift and precise. Sterling Thorne, facing pressure from its own diversity committee and not wanting to be associated with such public bigotry, terminated its partnership with Chad Hayworth. He lost his 7-figure income and his place in the corporate elite. Their life of casual luxury, funded by a system they felt they were above, came to an abrupt end. One crisp spring afternoon, Evelyn Reed was walking through Terminal 5 at JFK on her way to a flight to Singapore. She was conducting another audit, but today she was in a business suit, her identity known to the station staff. As she approached her gate, she saw a young black woman in a crisp, new Aerovista customer service uniform, confidently handling a complex ticketing issue for a non-English-speaking family. The young agent was patient, kind, and resourceful, using a translation app on her phone to communicate. Evelyn watched for a moment, a rare, genuine smile gracing her lips. After the agent had successfully resolved the family's issue and sent them on their way with a smile, Evelyn approached her. "Excuse me," Evelyn said. "I'm Dr. Reed." The young woman's eyes widened in recognition. "Dr. Reed, it's an honor. I'm Tiana. I'm new." "You handled that situation beautifully, Tiana," Evelyn said, with real professionalism and empathy. Tiana beamed. "Thank you, Mom. I just graduated from the Reed Initiative training last month. It's funny the story of what happened to you at O'Hare. It's what made me want to apply here. It made me believe this was a company that was actually serious about changing." In that moment, Evelyn saw the full impact of her actions. It wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about creating an environment where a new generation of employees like Tiana could thrive. It was about building an airline that lived up to the promises it made on its glossy posters. She had faced down ugliness and ignorance at gate C17, not with rage, but with a quiet, unyielding insistence on principle. The line that Brenda had drawn on the floor that day had become a line in the sand for the entire company. Because of what happened on that day, Aerovista Airlines had been forced to look in the mirror and decide what it truly wanted to be. And because of Dr. Evelyn Reed, it had chosen to be better. As she boarded her flight, she felt a sense of profound satisfaction. The audit was complete. This story is a powerful reminder that the abuse of power, no matter how small, can have devastating consequences, and that true integrity often comes in the most unexpected packages. Dr. Evelyn Reed wasn't just fighting for her right to board a plane. She was fighting for a principle that should be universal, that respect is not earned through status or appearance, but is a fundamental right for everyone. The swift and decisive karma that befell Brenda Javier and the Hayworths serves as a stark warning to anyone who believes their position puts them above accountability. If this story of justice and systemic change resonated with you, please hit that like button to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories of karma accountability and the incredible moments when the system is forced to correct itself. Thank you for listening.